Episode 8 with three-time published author, TEDx youth speaker, and world-renowned philanthropist, Jake Ducey. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this week on what I know will be another great episode. I am your host, Chewning, and this is EverForward Radio. Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of EverForward Radio. I am your host, Chewning. This week, we are in for a treat because I have my first ever published author on the show, Mr. Jake Ducey, author of Into the Wind and the Purpose Principles. We're going to be discussing today. I first heard Jake's story over on one of my other favorite podcasts, Josh Trent's Wellness Force Radio. And I was really just blown away by this guy's story, what he had accomplished at such a young age. And I say accomplishments in the terms of not physical, tangible success, but for lack of a better term, honestly, enlightenment. He really had just made me think differently about, wow, someone this young can experience so much and have such a huge sense of awareness, and to immediately just shed the ego, shed the self, put that best foot forward, and really live a life ever forward. He has taken all of the proceeds from his first book, Into the Wind, and use that money to help children in need in Guatemala. He has traveled the world. He is a TEDx youth speaker. He's in fact being even called the first millennial motivational speaker. So by age 23, he had already traveled the world, had this enlightenment, published a book, being endorsed by none other than Jack Canfield, the founder and writer of all of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. So this guy has his shit together. And actually, week one of launching this podcast back in January, Jake reached out to me. He saw my podcast pop up in the charts, heard the first episode, and just contacted me immediately, wanted to be involved with this. So it really means a lot coming from someone who has done so much in terms of showing us what success can look like in a non-tangible, physical, financial way. So without further ado, I'm going to get the interview started here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining me on this week's episode of EverForward Radio. I give you Jake Ducey. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of EverForward Radio, and I am here with Jake Ducey. Jake, how you doing today?
Doing wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Like we were talking about earlier, you are my first non-in-person interview. I'm in DC. You're in San Diego, California, right?
Yes.
I'm sure you're having a lot better weather than us right now. How are you sitting on the beach or something?
Today's I live 2 blocks off it, but today there's 0 clouds, and we went, and my girlfriend and I went and exercised in the morning. It was almost too hot. I almost didn't want to do it at 9 in the morning. It's starting to get warm again, so it's probably like mid-70s today.
I'm looking forward to California being my end game, like I was saying earlier. So send me a beach spot, all right?
Yeah, I got you.
So Jake, for those of my listeners who may not be familiar with you and your work, can you give us a little explanation as far as who Jake Ducey is, what you're doing, what you have done, and kind of how you got to this point where you are right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone can relate to this feeling of, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this what I'm meant for? And, you had that, and, part of that is probably what prompted you to make this show. And maybe absolutely. Part of that is what's allowing people or what's causing people to want to listen to your show. And for me, that was as a 19-year-old college freshman on a college basketball scholarship, studying business and economics, and sitting in economics class, I asked my teacher why we couldn't audit the Federal Reserve, which seems like a logical question in economics class.
That's a bold question.
Yeah. And my teacher basically told me to be quiet, memorize this textbook. We've got a test next week. This is in a creative discussion class.
Wow.
And that was very disenfranchising, not to mention the entire class was on his side. And I was arguing with the class, trying to have this conversation. It would make sense to not have that conversation in poetry class or Chinese class, but it was economics. And I left in the middle of class because it was so ridiculous. And I realized it wasn't a conducive place for my learning, and it wasn't going to help me to make a difference. It was helping me become a cog in the wheel. And I was very angry, and I walked out of class and I realized I was going to leave school and I was going to go travel and I was going to be a writer. And so I had a few $1,000s saved, and I left very shortly thereafter, and I went vagabond backpacking for a little bit, and I figured worst case scenario, go back to school or go to a junior college or whatever. And I ended up going for 6 months and ultimately deciding to write a book about it that no one would publish called Into the Wind, self-published that, went door to door selling it at farmers markets. It eventually sold its first 10,000 copies. Then Penguin Random House, the largest English publisher in the world, picked up two of my books after that.
Wow.
And it kind of launched this career, which my mission is really to invite people to really question their limitations. I think everyone's a genius, but the world de-geniuses us. And my work's about helping people, inviting people to look within themselves for that place.
So you kind of just springboarded from that class, and that was the catalyst for this movement, for the way that your life kind of took you?
Yeah, it was total dissatisfaction. I think dissatisfaction can be a powerful motivating force, and I think it's a great indicator, that change needs to be made. So that's what happened for me exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as far as funneling in where a lot of people may be lacking to have that catalyst or to take action is, kind of a lack of vision. And like I was telling you earlier, I recently wrapped up your purpose principles. And in the first couple pages, literally, I'm looking at page 3, and I highlighted the first place to focus our attention is vision, knowing what you want. So in that moment, it sounded really like you knew what you didn't want. And did that kind of help mold what your vision was going to be? Or did you already have that and that was just kind of like the last straw?
Yeah, I think knowing what you don't want obviously can bring you closer to what you do want, or prompt you to take action, which can eventually help you discover what it is that you want out of life. And so I think it was a combination of the both of them for me. I had this airy-fairy idea that I'd be a writer, but mind you, I failed junior English class in high school. I finished an independent study. The only reason I got into college is because I was first team all San Diego basketball player in one of the top basketball schools in all Southern California. And that's how I got into college. Okay. And so I wasn't a writer or anything. So part of me thought this, but then the other part totally dismissed it. So it was more of a pipe dream at that time than anything.
Why were you kind of dismissing that possibility immediately? Just because you knew you weren't good at it before, and so therefore you possibly couldn't be good at it moving forward?
My mom helped me do all my college admission. I was not, and I was the opposite of a student. And so I just, I say everybody's a genius, but the world de-geniuses you. Yeah. And I believe the narrative. I thought I was too young, and I was 19. Thought I was too young, and no one would read that, and how do you even do it? And, all those things. So I didn't dismiss it enough where I didn't give it any credence, but I wasn't totally sure if it was possible in the early stages until, until I came home from traveling and I wrote my first 10 pages and I was like, damn, this is actually kind of good.
And that's amazing. So you already had that self-realization shortly after that experience. What was it that kind of prompted you to put that, pen to paper and kind of just channel your experiences into writing? Was it just because you knew you always wanted to be a writer, or you just had something so significant happen to you that you're like, damn, people need to know about this. I need to write about it. I need to share. What was that catalyst, if anything?
Well, after economics class, I realized I wanted to be a writer. I just didn't know if I believed it. And what ended up happening is, I was traveling for 6 months. I was in Indonesia. I actually was hiking with some locals, and I fell off a cliff in the pouring rain.
I remember this story. That's right, yeah.
We were climbing, and I saw my life flash before my eyes, and thankfully I didn't, hit my head. It's just really as pure luck. And, people fall 1 inch and hit their head and get knocked out, and so it was really pure luck. And these guys saved my life, these local Indonesians that I didn't even know. And I remember after I fell, kind of coming to and opening my eyes And one of these guys jumped after me, and I didn't even know him. I started crying because I didn't even know this guy. I said it was the most heroic thing that ever happened to me besides my mom birthing me, but I wasn't conscious of my mom birthing me. Therefore, this was the most heroic thing I'm conscious of.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And I realized after they got me out, I was scraped up and bruised, but thankfully nothing was broken. And I realized that I was traveling all around the world looking for purpose, or like thinking that my life would be better somewhere else. And I realized I had destination addiction, and I think that is such a common thing. So I realized I was traveling really to avoid making a decision in life. I was like, I don't know if I could be a writer, so I'll just keep traveling. And when I get this passport stamp in Indonesia or Thailand or Australia, maybe then I'll find life. And it was a constant postponing of life. And I had this epiphany, and that's what caused me to be like, okay, I need to make this happen.
A constant postponing of life. I love that statement. That really resonates in a prior episode of mine that I talked about the power of taking action, and how that really was such a premise for myself for launching, this podcast and a lot of my other ventures, in my health coaching practice and personal training, and just, really networking and connecting and putting passion to purpose. And I talked about how, for whatever reason, I had a limiting belief, or was afraid of failing, or, sometimes even being afraid of succeeding. Cause then you're like, oh crap, if this takes off, am I going to be able to follow through with it? So, could you maybe expand upon that statement and just really, maybe see how that could apply to someone who hasn't fallen off a cliff? If we don't need to take that dive, how we can kind of, pick ourselves up from the bootstraps, and move forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, going on your statement about you scared of the responsibility of what could happen, that's very real fear. I mean, but as my career has grown, now I have 3 partners or employees or whatever you want to call it that work with me, all pretty recent. And so, now I have to manage cash flow and like all of these things that like I had no idea what this stuff even is. Yeah. And it's really stressful.
Like, what are these spreadsheets?
Yeah, right. And then like I get all these things in the mail for like the franchise tax board and like just all these things. And it's like, the money was lower at first, and then I'm trying to manage everything. And so that's stressful, and it's a lot of responsibility. But what I do is I look at it like, this is an inspiring challenge because it's in alignment with my highest values. My highest values are researching, studying, sharing, learning, traveling. And so all of these things, this is a medium of sharing what I learn and what I research and what I study. So it's one of my highest values in life. So the challenges in my business and growing it as a business owner are actually challenges that are moving me towards my highest values. And I try and put it in a context like that, so that it makes it creates a little emotional space where the fear or stress or worry doesn't paralyze me. I think that I think most of us, our biggest problem with challenges is they're challenges that are the choking monotony of ordinary existence. They're challenges we don't even care about in the first place, so they wipe us out. Sure. And so I try and go after those challenges that are in alignment with my highest vision and values.
I heard you say, you went to college on a basketball scholarship, so you clearly had one path in mind, and you were probably shooting for that. I'm sure if you go to a school for basketball, your end goal is to play professional basketball, but it sounded like the process along the way had a really different kind of journey for you. So someone who's kind of focusing on their success or what that end result looks like, how does that kind of work into, finding your happiness and finding your success? Is it really, can we fixate on that end product and reverse engineer it? Or like in your book, you talk about how, just focus more on what you love and let the success come to you afterwards.
Well, I think that focusing only on what you love can also be a pitfall for massive failure, because you do need to understand the business and entrepreneurial dynamics, or you're bound to fail. 75% of businesses fail within their first 5 years, and it's important to understand that. But I think that for me, it's a combination of both. It's knowing where I'm going to go, And for me, I had a whole identity crisis because I identified myself as this athlete. You know, I was like cool because I was a good athlete and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, all my friends are like, "What the heck happened to you? You know, you weirdo." And
that's a big turn from basketball to writer and speaker. Yeah.
Yeah, my hair grew like 20 inches. So, yeah, I think, you know, once I got past the social fears of being, you know, disliked or rejected or questioned, then the next thing was like, okay, what's my vision? And then the third thing was, in the early stages, I didn't know what I was doing. It was blind passion. It really was blind passion. And, you know, a lot of it was, you know, chance or luck, or I mean, you call it coincidence, you could call it synchronicity, whatever. Things would fall into place for me to barely just make enough money to keep going, really, because I was funding everything myself with a self-published book. So even though I sold 10,000 copies, I was putting everything back into it. And so I started really getting process over outcome. Abraham Maslow, really famous psychologist, he has a phrase, a self-actualized person. And he says 1% of the population is self-actualized, meaning that they're just living their ideal life and they know exactly who they are. They've harnessed their powers. And he says one of the primary things of a self-actualized person, to become one, you're in process over outcome. You're more involved with the process than you are the outcome, because when we're so involved with the outcome, then short-term challenges can kick our butts, so to speak, because we were like, well, I'm not here yet, and now there's this other challenge. And so I started getting in process over outcome and moving through that, but not blind passion, because I think you need to be smart. I'm not the person that's like, quit your job, mortgage your house, and leave. Yeah. I think that you need to be systematic and safe. Actually, you know, we're about to release a video on how to quit your job safely and successfully. You know, start saving, use your job like an investor, start saving a percentage of your money, and in 12 or 14 months, you'll have capital to be able to start your own business, and take it slow and systematic. So I'm definitely not a follow your passion blindly, but it was, you know, small, steady learning about compounding effect. The compounding effect of success is, you know, 6 years of this so far. You know, to a lot of people, they may think, well, I'm young, but I've been doing this longer, you know, than a lot of people in their 40s. And I think the reason that I've been able to sustain it is recognizing and having perspective on compounding effect. And, you know, now putting business systems, because you need to do that eventually.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about having that passion, but also, you know, being smart about it. Not to say that following passion doesn't always follow through, because I know with you, it did. You really went out on a limb, put yourself out there. I remember the story of you introducing yourself to Jack Canfield and how that kind of spurred things along for you. Could you maybe talk about that and how you went from having your work, your self-published work, putting yourself out there to one of the people that you looked up to the most, and how that paid off for you?
Yeah. Well, I was listening to one of Jack, for people that don't know, he's the creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, 500 million copies sold. Time Magazine
kind of a big deal.
Yeah. Time Magazine declared him the publishing phenomena of the last decade.
Wow.
And I was listening to one of his programs, and he said, you know, make a list of the top 100 things you want to accomplish in life. And number 9, I put to meet, be endorsed by, and mentored by Jack Canfield. Now, that's a pretty ridiculous idea, but I thought I'd play the game and do it.
You wrote that down. You set that down as a tangible goal. Okay.
Yeah, and I hung it on my wall. You know, I forgot about it. You know, I wasn't actively pursuing plans to make that happen. But I eventually got a call from my old speaking coach, and she said to come to this event because Jack Canfield was emceeing it. There'd be 1,000 people there, but maybe I'd have a chance to meet him. So, you know, I drove the 2 hours and I showed up. And when I showed up, I realized 2 things. And the first was, you're not dressed up when you're wearing like a thrift shop leather coat with corduroys. You know, that's not really that doesn't really fit to a gala.
Showing up in one of the Dumb and Dumber tuxedos or something, right?
Yeah, it was similar to that. And you know, the second thing I realized, it's hard to build rapport when there's 1,000 people there. So, you know, everyone's in line to take pictures with them for 2 seconds, and that's not a place where you can do something like that. So I didn't go in those lines. And my seat was on the upper deck, and it's one of those events where when you bought the ticket, that's when you ordered your food.
Okay.
Then they would come deliver it all. So we had already had our food all ordered, you know, in advance. And this whole event's going on, and I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to meet this guy. 1,000 people, everyone wants to take pictures of him, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Odds aren't looking good.
Yes, super low. And to build rapport and have a legitimate conversation. And it's getting towards the end of the night, and they start to put the food up at our table. They're starting to make their rounds, and there's a bunch of tables, a few hundred tables. So it's going to take them a minute. And eventually he announces, they're going to start serving food here pretty soon, so we're going to take a break. And I'm like, okay, this is my last chance. So I'm on the upper deck, so I got to walk down the stairs, and I start going towards his table. His table's at the very center of the whole event. And right when I get there, someone else walks up and grabs his attention, and I'm standing there awkward, looking over my shoulder, like trying to pretend that I'm, not stalking him. And I end up, the person walks away, and he sits down, and I end up walking up. I said, "Hi, Jack. My name's Jake Ducey.
Wow.
I wrote this book. You inspired it." And he probably heard that 1,000 times. So he was like, "Well, how did I inspire you?" And I said, "When someone says no, you say next." And I started just quoting him.
Yeah.
And he just laughing. And he's like, "You got to meet my wife." And he grabs the book out of my hand and taps his wife. His wife went to high school with my mom. So I'm talking to him about that and like weird things. And, we're just talking, but then the waiter comes to put the food on their table. And, I don't want to be that dude that's like, while he's eating, I'm just like blabbing his ear off. And so I'm like to grab the book to go back, and I'm like turning to walk around, and he's like, wait, are you going to eat that? So I was so excited and so caught up in the moment. I didn't realize out of like 1,000 people, there are no empty seats. The person to his left just before I walked up there.
So he had an open spot.
What's that?
He had an open spot right there next to him.
Yeah, right to his left. And the waiter didn't know. So the waiter put food there. There's no empty seats anywhere. 5 minutes later, somebody else would have grabbed that seat. The food was there. And he's like, "Are you going to eat it?" And so I sat there and built a friendship with him and his wife. And that's how, I got to know him and learn from him a bit, peek into his world a little bit. And he wrote the foreword to the book and stuff like that. So that was how that happened. And what really blew my mind is think about all the things that had to happen that were outside of my control. Like I got the inclination to go at the moment, which I didn't know that the waiters were behind the scenes going to his table out of any of the tables. They went to his table. 5 minutes later, somebody else would have had that seat. 10 minutes earlier, and there wouldn't have been any food. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to sit down. And all of those things. And that's when I started to really grasp, there's a whole part of our unconscious mind. Psychologists tell us we have 65,000 thoughts in a day. 95% of them are conscious. And we have an unconscious mind that controls a large part of our life. And that was a turning point for me.
So what I'm hearing is that your thought process and your just day-to-day thinking played a big part in your daily life and how that kind of turned in fruition into action. Something that I always tell a lot of my clients and friends, and something that's resonated here on the show so far, is that where the mind goes, the body will follow. And you were thinking it, you wrote it out, you had it staring at you on your wall. Do you think if your thought process was any different, if you didn't genuinely believe and see that in your head, that it would have limited you in any way? I mean, what are your ideas on, kind of taking thought into action?
I think it's important to understand what the subconscious mind is in human psychology. So 65,000 thoughts in a day.
And I'm sure we're aware of them all, right? We all process every single 65,000.
Probably 13 of them. I remember 13 thoughts so far today. We know none of them. And that's because it's unconscious. And then you have a conscious mind, which is responsible for 5% of your life. And that's like, I'm going to take action. I have this idea. I have this thing. I'm going to ask that person out. It's like you consciously being there, which hardly ever happens. And then eventually that motivation wears off, and then the unconscious takes over. And, the way that we're programmed by our parents, our friends, our teachers, our influences growing up is what determines our life. And so when you write things down, I listen to hypnosis. I have my own hypnosis for anyone that wants to listen to it. It's just jakeshypnosis.com. I listen to it every day for the last 3 years. And when you do these types of things, you're creating repetition, and repetition influences the subconscious mind. And
the habit building.
It forms an unconscious habit. And every thought has a chemical reaction that influences your physiology. And when you are when you know where you want to go, you're opening up your mind to possibilities that didn't exist before, for sure. I mean, 9 out of 10 people die with less than $10,000 and no financial assets. About 90% of people, when they go to retire, they end up needing not only Social Security, but also their children or family that they need to depend on. And I think I think what that is really an example of, a lot of people have never really planned their life. And, if we don't do that, we kind of get stuck in a default path that, the average default path isn't very good. Most people are a minimum of $10,000 in credit card debt. It's not, unless you really start to decide your life, it'll be chosen for you. That's for sure.
Could not agree more with that statement. That really reminds me of one of my favorite sections in your Purpose Principles book, all about thinking your purpose. And it starts with a quote from James Allen that you are today where your thoughts have brought you. You will be tomorrow where your thoughts take you. And kind of just to echo what you're talking about, that thought process has physiological manifestations, and that's forming subconscious and in time conscious habits. So the power of seeing your future and thinking your purpose, in the Purpose Principles, I kind of get that as a very, very strong underlying theme. So could you maybe dive into the power behind purpose and thinking, and how the Purpose Principles really should be used for someone who's reading it?
Every single thing that we emotionalize, a thought or belief we emotionalize, has a chemical reaction in our brain that influences our central nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, here's a perfect real life example. When you're a kid and you think there's a monster under your bed, what happens? Your hands start sweaty, your heart starts beating, you can't sleep at night, you're having a physiological reaction to a fear, and you think it's legitimate, but you're having a physiological reaction that's absolutely terrifying. And you scream to your parent, and it's a second time that week, so the parent's pissed off, they want to sleep, and they grab you out, they grab you by the bed, they make you look under the bed, they say, look, there's no monster. And you look, and there's not no monster. And then all of a sudden you relax, and your sweat's gone, and you can go to bed. You relax because you looked under the bed and it wasn't a real fear. Same thing happens. Somebody thinks there's a robber in their house. I remember being in 8th grade and calling the police because I thought a robber was in my house. There was no robber. And we do that all the time. I think like everyone has thought there was somebody in their house at one time. It's real. You have a chemical reaction. Your brain has a biochemical reaction to a thought. It influences your nervous system. You legitimately respond on a cellular level to that chemical that's being produced when you give emotional credence to a certain thought or idea long enough.
Absolutely.
And we do that with everything in our lives. We do that when we think we're going to be fired. We do that we think we're not good enough, and it fills us with a bunch of stress and worry, and then that paralyzes us and we don't ask that person out. So, it goes to show that, where your attention is actually affecting you on a physiological level, and how you feel is ultimately what's going to decide what you do and do not take action on.
I think it's usually easier for us, just human nature, like your example of being afraid of something, whether it's, we think there's someone under our bed or in our house, and then we realize soon after that it's not real, that cloud in our head kind of goes away, that doubt. How can we still apply those same principles of the power of our thought and that process when maybe we haven't come to the other side? Maybe we haven't had our parents come check under our bed. Maybe we're still going through this trying, terrible process, financial uncertainty, a hard breakup, a terminal illness, someone still going through a process. How can we break through that, not knowing when that clarity is going to come?
Well, if it's financial, most people's, I was just with a friend the other day, he's in so much debt. He doesn't save a cent because he's in debt. So the rational thing is to pay everybody else first. But if you don't do that, you're the goal, and it doesn't matter how much money you make. You can make $100,000 a month, but if you don't have basic financial management, you'll never grow your net worth. Income is not net worth. You have to grow your net worth to ever get out of financial problems. It has to go from red to neutral to green and grow on the positive side. So first, starting to save, even if it's $100 a month and you have all these creditors and all these things, you need to start saving $100 a month and start growing to 200, 300, 400, 500,000, 10,000 and letting it grow, just to poke at that one. But, I think it's understanding what fear is. So we needed fear to survive. Our ancestors needed to run from giant things that could eat them. And we had impending threats in our environment all the time, whether it was the elements or whether it was predators. We needed fear. Our brain, one of its primary purposes was preservation and protection. And that's the only thing that allowed the human species to be what it is today, is because of fear. And, that part of our brain hasn't evolved. Today, we don't have impending threats in our lives unless you live in, a war-torn area where a bomb might go off. And, obviously
Right.
There are some places that, you do have some basic survival that is not met. But today, pretty much none of us have that, especially if you're listening to this, you likely don't. And that part of our brain still exists, and the brain's one of its primary purposes is still preservation and protection. But now we don't have these serious dangers. So we, because our brain wants to preserve and protect, now instead of protecting the body, it tries to protect the identity. And the greatest, one of the greatest threats is social fears: failure, loss, suffering.
Sure.
What will this person think of me? And I think we don't recognize, that all that stuff about fear that I said about it's one of our brain's primary purposes. The brain hasn't really evolved, and we have these reactions. And when you can, I think, put it in perspective, you can realize, you can ask yourself, is this a legitimate danger, or is this just like a fear, a social fear? Obviously you probably shouldn't mortgage your house tomorrow when you have 2 kids. Don't do that.
Right.
Be smart and start to save your money. But don't tell yourself, I was talking to a client yesterday that we just started, and she's like, it's not safe for me to start my own business. And I said, well, that's not true. It's not smart for you to mortgage your house tomorrow and quit your job, but it is safe for you to start your own business. It's just probably going to take you longer than somebody else who could start full time. You just have to start part time. So we have all these ridiculous ideas that immobilize us. But I think when we can recognize, is this a real danger, or is this just a fear? And I think when we can put them in context, we'll still probably have a physiological reaction that'll be really scary and uncomfortable, but we can remind ourselves what Nelson Mandela said: courage isn't the absence of fear, it's when you're scared and you do something anyways.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's something that can resonate with pretty much anyone listening to this podcast. And, personal experience, that was something that, I wish I could have looked into the future and had this clarity, this awareness that it's all going to be okay, and tell myself when I was going through, the terminal illness with my father, to really just to stop and to register what's going on, realize the situation, take control of what you can, but then really try to divide the difference between what is happening to you and what you are allowing to happen. I really think there's a difference there. And with your client there, it sounds like, she had an awareness of what her situation was, but you kind of came back as far as you're not really quite looking at this correctly. There's a difference in being smart about doing something or just, blindly going into it. So I think that's a great point. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
So with the purpose principles, this is something that is your most recent project, correct?
No, Profit from Happiness is my most recent book.
Okay.
What is it? It's 2007. It's beginning of 2017. That came out in 2016.
Okay. So what are you currently working on now? Can we expect another book from you soon? Or
I'm not working on a book right now. I'm going on tour in Australia, seminar tour in Australia in May. Going to do Canada in July, and got a bunch of online products out right now. I got a whole thing called Subconscious Bootcamp that's about how to reprogram the subconscious mind. Got some cool free stuff online. The jakeshypnosis.com. You can download the hypnosis for free. So that's what I've been working on right now, is just actually putting together my legitimate team. And so got an awesome videographer. We've been making some great new videos, and that's what I've been working on a lot more lately, is really just creating a sustainable model.
Sure, absolutely. So for anyone who's maybe in the same or similar boat as to where you were, and kind of having that epiphany, that moment of this isn't what I want to do, or something showing you really what it is that you're meant to do or that you want to do. Having gone through that yourself, what's maybe one piece of advice you could give those people to really to take action or to bring that awareness into what they want, what they don't want?
Well, most podcasts turn into education through the entertainment through insight. We just listen and we say we're doing things, but we don't do anything. We tell ourselves, well, I'm not watching television, and we don't do anything. So, and we flip through 100 podcasts like it was 100 channels of cable. And
Guilty.
So I would say, write out a 20-year vision and put it on your refrigerator, firstly, and you can do a lot of practices to start to clarify what you want, write a list of 30 things you want to be, another list of 30 things you want to do, another list of 30 things you want to have. These are things that take you a while. People are like, well, it's taking me an hour. I'm like, well, it's an hour of your life to create the life that you want. It's like, we're so used to not thinking. Most people never think. Bob Proctor says, don't mistake mental activity with thinking. And most people don't think, they just have mental activity. And so I think, 30 things you want to do, be, and have would be great. Writing your 20-year vision, having the clarity around that, and then take baby steps. Jack Canfield talks about the rule of 5 things to do every day to move closer to your goals. Write it on a little index card. You can turn it into the rule of 3 if you got a job and you don't have that much time. 3 things. It might be an email, it might be studying this. 3 things every day, and the compounding effect of that over the course of a year, 365 days multiplied by 3 things, that's like 11 or 1,200 inspired actions, inspired steps forward. The compounding effect of that over 10 years. Bill Gates says most people overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and underestimate what they can accomplish in a decade. And I see people all the time that say they want to do what I'm doing, they would be an author, and they were whatever. They tell me they have some other idea, some other business they want to do, but they're gone in 6 months or 12 months because it's they're so short term. You need to really have a long-term strategy, and I think that's why it's important to start saving and having that psychological cushion and starting to grow your net worth outside of the context of maybe your passion project. Mm-hmm.
And even to get a little bit more specific, Jake, you're how old today?
25.
25. So, you're definitely in what we call, the millennial generation, and you're definitely blowing me away as far as how much and how soon you've had these realizations. Yes, you've had a lot of life happen to you in your short time that I'm sure would have anyone thinking differently. But most millennials these days are not really well known for this forward thinking and, being philanthropists and helping children in Guatemala and, writing books. It's all more usually kind of focused on what can I get accomplished in the easiest amount of work, the less amount of work to get the most amount of reward. So how is it that you gotten out of this mold, and what would you say to other people of your generation that we need to maybe wake up on?
I'd say no matter how old you are, you've got to question everything, even question what I'm saying, see if what I'm saying is true, and look it up yourself.
Fair enough.
And I think you'll be surprised. And I think what limits us most is unexamined assumptions that other people have told us that we've accepted, or our culture has told us we've accepted. The perfect example is like, most people's political views they have because their parent had that and they overheard it at the dinner table.
Sure.
No matter what their political view is, it's a perfect example of it. So we have these unexamined assumptions and that we haven't questioned, and they control our lives. And I just started getting curious. I was like, how, like what do really rich people do with their money? Like what?
Yeah.
Just like questions like that no one knows. 9 out of 10 people die with less than $10,000 and no financial assets, which is a clear indicator that almost no one knows what the heck they're doing. No one knows how to create a good life. If you do not have any money and you're in debt, your life is limited. Your options are limited. And it's clear that pretty much no adult, even if they're 20 years old to you, knows what they're doing.
Sure.
They're probably in debt. Most people are in debt. Most people don't own their houses. Most people, and nothing's wrong with that. But when you grasp that most people don't know what they're doing, and then you question everything people says, you find your own truth. And this is just me sharing my truth, and you may find things don't resonate with you, and that's great. But I think out of everything, there's great things to learn. I'm reading John D. Rockefeller's book, who I don't find a particularly great person. His biography. Him and J.P. Morgan bought the first president ever for their own business interests. They were the first people to ever buy political office.
Really?
And they use their money to do all types of things for their own interests. They were the first people to really, do a lot of these corrupt things that a lot of, it's talked about a lot today. But he also was the richest person in the world and did a lot of amazing things, and I'm willing to learn from him. So I'm putting my prejudice aside to get curious about what I can learn from this person. So I think curiosity and questions, are really important.
Absolutely. Great point. Yes. So Rockefeller definitely was doing something right.
Yeah.
So kind of in closing here, like you said earlier, we try to talk this talk and, we try to walk this walk and, things that we say to match what we do. But to your example of, maybe we don't sit and watch Netflix all day, but, we may have a similar vice of binging on, podcasts and trying to sponge up as much as we can. So when you're not in your head or focusing on, this growth process or helping others, what's something that gets you out of that mindset? What do you do to kind of just separate and break that pathway?
Biographies are great. A lot of people what's his name? Tim Ferriss says he reads fiction to get out of it, but biographies do that for me. Nonfiction books don't always do it. So biographies do that for me. I get lost in someone's story. Exercise. I mean, my girlfriend and I are, probably 6 days a week, we're doing some form of very strenuous physical activity. Is great. Meditation. I said I do my hypnosis every day. If anyone wants to get that, jakeshypnosis.com. So, I mean, those are really my primary things, are my highest values: health, research, studying, sharing, traveling, and, my relationships. So, when I'm not working on business, I'm doing things that give me pleasure and peace, which is reading and learning and, getting outside and being outside as much as I can, and exercise and health. We spend a fair amount of time on our health, and a fair amount of money on it too. It just even takes 30 minutes a day, to juice and make all of our green juice and then clean it up after. And
health.
So just putting those things as priorities.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. What I'm hearing is kind of, being that continuous student of life, and a student of life isn't always just watching something, reading something, being a traditional student in a sense, but just, being open and aware to other walks of life and other people's stories. Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, man. I think it's easy. Everyone listening to these types of podcasts obviously either has started something new and different and they're excited about it, or they want to, and that's why they're listening. And I think that it's easy to become a workaholic with a new project and stuff like that. And I'm
it's so exciting.
Reading. Yeah, it's so exciting. And, sometimes it can cause burnout. So I think it's important to have a whole perspective. What's his name? Michael Gerber has that book, The E-Myth. And one of the main points that I got out of the book is your business is not your life. It really isn't. And I think that, it's important to have that and, have some space for other things that give you pleasure and peace.
All work and no play. Isn't that how it goes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jake, thank you so much for being with us here today on EverForward Radio. Outside of this podcast, where can the audience connect with you?
Facebook's my favorite platform, just Jake Ducey. JakeDucey.com, D as in David, UCEY, jakeshypnosis.com if you want to get that. Facebook, YouTube, all the fun stuff.
Awesome. And what I heard you say in the beginning that you were coming up on some tours and stuff. So anything in the immediate future, perhaps in your area of Southern California, or where could maybe someone in person catch up with you next?
Well, it depends where you are. I'll be in Australia in May for seminars for the whole month. We're going to do Canada in July, all throughout Canada for a month. And then we're going to do Southern California at the end of the year.
Awesome. Travel. I love it. That's probably one of my biggest pieces of advice I tell everyone is if you haven't been out of your state, stop that. Go literally get out of your state to get out of your state, physically and mentally. I can't promote travel enough. So that's awesome. You're taking your experiences all over the world, man.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you, man.
Again, Jake, thank you so much for being here today. That's going to be a wrap for this week's episode on EverForward Radio.
All right, Chase. Thank you.
Wow, I hope you all really enjoyed that one as much as I did. It is just amazing to see and hear what Jake is accomplishing at such a young age. Thank you all so much for joining me in this week's episode. I hope that you take this message, apply it, and live your life ever forward.